All right, so joining me now is Hayden Cilley of ClutchPoints. He's a Suns beat reporter for ClutchPoints. We're just going to really do a deep dive into the Suns season so far. It's kind of been a hectic year, but first things first, how you doing today, Hayden?
Doing good, man. Really appreciate you having me on just to talk about all things Suns.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let's just dive into the season the Suns are having so far. Before we get started, let's sort of think about your expectations coming into this season. You know, they hire Mike Budenholzer as a head coach, widely regarded as one of the better offensive coaches in the league, and then you bring in Tyus Jones in the offseason to sort of help facilitate that offense a little bit better, have more of a traditional point guard and playmaker there. What's sort of your expectations headed into this year?
Well, definitely a lot better than what they're doing now. You bring in a guy like Budenholzer who has his offensive philosophy where it's basically pace and space, shoot a lot of threes. And it's just funny because you have three of the best mid-range guys in the game with Booker and Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, and like those guys are extremely efficient from three, but they don't take as many as maybe some of the other stars in the league do. So I thought that was a little bit interesting how that would be incorporated. Budenholzer was actually a bit excited about bringing Yusuf Nurkic on and sort of having him be a little bit of that Brook Lopez esque sort of center in terms of being able to space the floor, grab rebounds, just be that enforcer in the paint. But yeah, I mean, it has not lived up to expectations. The offense looks good, but it's just they give up too many points defensively. I know Budenholzer's not a defensive guy. I know Frank Vogel was, but at some point, I mean, I'll see if I could pull up the number here, but dude, their defensive rating as a unit is horrendous. They have a 118.4. It's 27th in the league. Like that's bad. Their offensive rating, yes, it's gotten better. They're eighth in the league, but when you look at the numbers last season, and you look at, oh well, Frank Vogel's not an offensive guy; he's a defensive guy. Their offensive rating, they were ninth in the league, and they were 13th in defensive rating. They had a positive net rating, which was amongst top 10 in the league. So you expected to see a lot better. There's a lot more I can talk about if you certainly want to. I mean, I could go on and on about this whole thing, but I would say, just for myself, many of my colleagues, and as well as just the fan base in general, I think saying that this season hasn't lived up to expectations would honestly be kind of an understatement.
Yeah, for sure. I think you really nailed it there. I mean, just talking about this roster construction, I do think it's interesting to your point about the three-point shooting between Beal, Booker, and KD. They're all extremely efficient, but they're more so mid-range guys in terms of how they're creating their shots. And I do think there's a little bit of a repetition there. Do you sort of view that as a roster construction issue almost, or do you think it's just these guys aren't necessarily gelling together?
I think it's just they're not gelling together. I don't think that the roster construction itself is necessarily bad. I mean, Beal is an extremely efficient scorer, one of the most efficient guys I've seen. I mean, he's almost shooting 40% from three this season. Same thing with Durant. Same thing, or close to the same with Booker. I mean, his degree of difficulty is a bit more difficult because he's taking shots off the dribble, he's taking them coming off of a screen, he's navigating a pick and roll. A lot of those more intricate things. I mean, he doesn't have some of the catch and shoot looks that like a Durant or a Beal has because he's the main guy that is really leading them in terms of, bringing the ball up the floor, initiating the offense. Yes, you have Tyus Jones, but the attention's going to go to Booker. And so I think it's just more so like they just don't gel together, and that's completely fine. There have been so many instances in the NBA where you have superstars team up together and it just doesn't work. You had the big three with Durant and James Harden and Kyrie Irving in Brooklyn, although majority of them were injured. That didn't really work, when Kyrie went to Boston. Granted, that was, really before Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown became superstars, but still, like that didn't necessarily work. The infamous, Brooklyn Nets team, with Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett and those guys, like sometimes it just doesn't work. And it's completely fine, but I think it's a completely different thing to recognize when it doesn't work. And I think that this front office has failed to do so. Like you're not going to trade Booker. You're just not going to. Like if you don't have to, you're not going to. He's your franchise guy. I mean, heck, I mean, you paired him with some young guys, like Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson and DeAndre Ayton. I mean, and you had that veteran in there like Chris Paul. I mean, they went to the finals, man. With him. And so, and Beal has that no trade clause, which kind of leaves Durant as the odd man out. And so yeah, it's more so just they're just not gelling together. Injuries haven't helped the last 2 years. When it feels that whenever one guy comes back, another guy gets hurt. But yeah, I wouldn't say the roster construction itself is too bad, rather than they're just not gelling together for a barrage of reasons, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. That definitely makes sense, and we can get into some of the trade rumor stuff a little bit later. But to your point, it is really a difficult position because you're not going to trade that franchise guy in Booker. That's just something that should really be off the table at this point. And then trying to move off Bradley Beal, we saw that that was definitely a discussion approaching the trade deadline, especially with the Jimmy Butler trade rumors. But yeah, ultimately his no trade clause was just too much to overcome. So then it sort of does leave Kevin Durant in this weird position, and really like 48 hours or so approaching the trade deadline back in February. There was some real discussions of a KD trade heating up, and then nothing materialized. Obviously, he said he didn't want to go back to Golden State, reportedly. However, it really sets up for a KD trade in the offseason, which in some ways could be affecting the team when you know a guy might be on the way out. But I just want to go back to the point about defense, because I think that's a really important point that you brought up there. As you said, 27th ranked defense in the league. How much do you think their rim protection in particular is hurting them? And then what do you think of sort of the way the rotations are being handled, specifically with Ryan Dunn being one of the better defenders, not getting a ton of minutes there?
How long do we have to talk about rotations, my friend? It's been the biggest point of emphasis really since the new year. Ryan Dunn was playing so much, and, yes, look, he has his shortcomings offensively, but the defense is too good to pass up. I mean, even there's a metric I found, I don't have it with me because it took place at the beginning of the year, but I would say like the first couple weeks of the season, he was limiting guys to like 40% as the primary defender. Mind you, he defended James Harden, LeBron, Luca, like the elite of the elite players, especially in terms of ball handlers. Like, yes, that there were times, especially against Luca, where like he just got baited into a bunch of fouls. And that's stuff as a rookie that you're gonna learn to not do that by simply just playing and being on the floor. I mean, if I can find it, there's a really cool defensive metric that I found really before the All-Star break with Ryan Dunn. And it baffles me because yes, you want offense out there, but at the same time, there has to be some kind of push-pull effect. You have to be willing to sacrifice something. And I just feel that yes, it also a fun little thing. The Suns really didn't need a traditional point guard. Tyus Jones he has done exactly what he's supposed to do in his role. However, the lineup of Beal, like if they had a lineup of Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Ryan Dunn, and now Nick Richards, dude, you talk about versatility on all sides. You talk about, in terms of being able to space out the floor, in terms of quite literally, I'd say really everybody except for Richards being able to guard 1 through 5. Like, dude, that's crazy. You don't have, like, there's not a lot of teams, maybe with the exception of like the Boston Celtics, I would say, that could really do that. And it baffles me that he won't go to guys like that. Here's a little stat I found. This is heading into the All-Star break. He's first in fourth quarter defensive field goal percentage. He's first in defensive field goal percentage among all rookies. He's fourth in defensive efficient field goal percentage on off-screen actions. That's a fun little advanced stat. Ninth in most blocks, ninth in most second chance points, and then 12th in defensive field goal percentage among 152 players. Like, come on, man. Like, I know these are very advanced, like nerdy, geeky statistics, but dude, like the proof is in the pudding. But also for a rookie, you can't play him for 10 minutes and punish him when he doesn't make a shot. Like his confidence is so rattled, and I hear, you know, so many of my colleagues and even myself, we hear from people all the time. Why don't you ask Mike Budenholzer about Ryan Dunn? Why don't you ask him about Ryan Dunn? And we're like, dude, we are trying. We hear the same answer all the time, and we talk about yes, he talks about well, we want to have a good offense, yada yada yada, but there's an old saying, defense wins championships, and I'm not going to sit here and say that the big three are elite defenders at all, but having someone like a Ryan Dunn, man, that's so huge. And you know, I think putting together the rotation is something you do at the beginning of the season and maybe you finish it in November, right? I would maybe even say early December is like the cutoff. That's the cutoff to where okay, we have our legitimate rotation. And granted, players have been injured, but dude, like they're moving players in and out of the lineup all the time. There's no consistency. Yes, you have the consistency of Beal, Durant, and Booker, but even at the beginning of the year, they benched Bradley Beal. They thought that was the issue. And, I will say it. I'll say this as much as I possibly can. Beal has been such a pro. Like he really has. I want to give that dude his flowers every time that I can because if anybody deserves to get out of Phoenix, it's that guy. He hasn't been a distraction. He's in fact like he thrived off the bench. I think he had two like in his first 3 games, he had 2 games of scoring 25 plus and like shooting over like 55% from the field. It was something crazy. But like he hasn't been a distraction, but there's no camaraderie because there's no set lineup. And again, Tyus has been good, but dude, like he's been getting. I can't remember what team really started it, but there's one game that they played where I'm telling you they just took Tyus Jones to school defensively. Like they just isolated him, and it's not that he doesn't try. It's just he's small. He's small for NBA standards. Like compared to me, he's probably a giant. I mean, I'm only 5'8", and he's like 6 feet tall. So even for me, I'm like, dang, I'm like, he's a big dude. But in terms of the NBA, like these guys are kind of small. And so the problem with the rotations is that there's no consistency. That's the problem. And you can't just pluck guys in and out of the lineup to play, especially young players. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really brought up a ton of good points there. And yeah, just like you said, I mean, it's really hard to really establish any sort of consistency as a team when you're constantly changing up the rotations. And I think you brought up a lot of good points about Dunn defensively, and the stats you brought up were really good. I just want to throw another one out there. When Ryan Dunn's on the court, the Suns defense actually jumps up to 13th in the league. So that's a massive jump there, and just goes to show his overall impact. And then I think sort of like you talked about with the versatility aspect of it and just having guys that can offer different skill sets and starting five together or any lineup together. I think it's really crucial because Ryan Dunn's another guy, although he does have limitations as a shooter, he's someone that doesn't need the ball in his hands. And even if you look at a guy like Tyus Jones, for as great of a playmaker as he is, he's going to need the ball in his hands to really do what he does best. And then obviously KD, Booker, and Beal, all those three guys will need the ball in their hands as well. So it's really a lot to manage. So I think just having those guys who can play off ball, even if they're not the best shooters in the world, is really crucial offensively. And then another guy I wanted to sort of bring up is Royce O'Neal because I think he has been one of the few sort of bright spots there in terms of the rotation and certainly defensively. I think he's really stood out whenever I watch Suns games. So I was curious to get your perspective on him as well.
Yeah, Royce has been the epitome of consistent ever since he joined the team. And he was teammates with Kevin Durant before, and KD's told us all the time, like, I know what to expect of him, and he knows what I expect of him. And I think that's a really good thing, to be honest. Uh, that there are games where he can shoot the ball lights out, but there are some games where he can't. But that's okay. That's one of the nice things. And as you mentioned, Eamon, like one of the bright spots of that team is how consistent he is. Like, you know what you're going to get. You know what you're going to get from Royce O'Neal on a given night. You're going to get someone that will be willing to defend the toughest player, someone that's tough, that's just going to do all the gritty things. That's going to, grab the loose rebound, that's going to dive for the loose ball, that is going to put his body on the line, draw a charge, and stuff like that. Like that gets his team going. And when he's dominant from three, like he has been a couple times this season, I mean, he's hit some really, really big shots. He's hit some shots to where it has swung the momentum of the game in the Suns' favor. And so he's just a pro. He's a guy that, I'll keep saying it. You know what you're gonna get. And in this league, that's so important. You're gonna get someone that is gonna defend at a high level, that can shoot the three ball efficiently. And there have been times this season where, for example, if a guy's been out and Budenholzer has put him in the starting lineup, or he's, 6 man off the bench, he's giving him the green light to shoot. And there's been a barrage of times where, he's connected on, let's say, three, four, five, even six threes in a game. And so, yeah, I mean, he's been, as you said, my friend, he's been one of the lone bright spots, and probably outside of the big three, probably the most consistent member of the Suns this season.
Yeah, definitely. I just wanted to bring him up because I feel like he's a guy that doesn't necessarily get talked about enough, especially sort of with all this negativity around the Suns. I just wanted to give him a shout out 'cause, like you said, he's been so consistent, and yeah, that's definitely great to hear as someone who's around these guys every day. Then another couple players in the rotation that have sort of emerged recently that I wanted to discuss are Bol and then Colin Gillespie. What do you think of their impact so far? And then specifically, sort of the double big lineups that they've been going to. They've changed up their starting lineup recently with Bol and Nick Richards. What impact do you see there?
Bol is, I love watching him play. I really, really do. And because he's just a guy that, like, he is literally, like, this is just a me thing, though. He's 7'2". He's got this, like, over 8-foot wingspan. Dude tries to block every shot. And is it the best thing to do on the court? Probably not. But I won't lie, in terms of my own personal enjoyment, I love it. I love it because he'll get out on the perimeter and a guy will shoot. He'll be like, he's a big guy, I can shoot over. And then they realize, oh, shoot, he's got an 8-foot wingspan. And like the shot doesn't even go anywhere close to the rim because he got a couple fingers on it. He brings more rebounding. He brings the shot blocking that they need. There are definitely times though where it's been more prevalent the last few games or so. Teams have been attacking him on the perimeter. They've been getting by. They've been baiting him into fouls, and I think the duo of him and Nick Richards is certainly good. You have that inside out presence. But I will say when Bol plays in front of the Suns home crowd, it is electric. Like when he's introduced as a starter, when he makes shots, I mean, he had this pass. I thought Bud was going to kill him. I really did. Like he had this pass. He literally threw a behind the back pass right on the money to Damian Lee. I saw that happen and I was literally looking up. I'm like, please, Lord. I'm like, have him make it. I'm like, this play's going to go bananas. And he did. And he made the shot. But, like, yes, Bol is not going to make the right play all the time. But he's an energy guy. He is a guy where if you give him consistent minutes, even if it's 15, 20 a game, he's going to bring you rebounding. He's going to bring shot blocking, most importantly. But he alters a lot of shots. That's the thing. Because yeah, and I saw it. I think Zion was probably the biggest proponent of this, but Zion's also a freak of nature, so I kind of take it with a grain of salt. But a bigger guy can kind of do what he wants with Bol because Bol has a skinnier frame. Like someone, I'm sure Zion weighs more than Bol, like by quite a bit too. And so like, he was able to kind of barrel his way inside and bait him in for some fouls and things of that sort. Man, I mean, there's a lot of upside with Bol. I just don't think he ever really got the chance to show what he could do. And again, yes, the shot blocking is cool, but he makes things difficult because when you go in the paint and even if he steps up, you as a guard or a forward, like, I don't know if I want to pull up from here. I don't know if I want to settle because you could drive by and you can get right by him, but he's so like his wingspan is so massive that he could literally just swat a shot without even having to move. He could just turn around and just sort of flick it. So yeah, I mean, his minutes have fluctuated, I would say, the last few games or so. It's a lot of it is matchup based, which I get, but I do want to shout out the boy. I want to give him some love because he alone has given a lot of energy. His teammates have seen it. We've seen it in practice that he's putting up shots. He's working with coaches, and you can see that he's getting better, and ultimately that teams are respecting him and taking him more seriously as a legitimate threat on the floor.
Yeah, for sure. I think you really hit on everything there, and yeah, it's really awesome to see him getting sort of more consistent minutes recently, getting more into that rotation as he did get a lot of DMPs toward the beginning of the season. But yeah, that sort of goes back to our previous conversation about just sort of inconsistent rotations and how that sort of does harm players in a way. But it's great to see how he's really came alive these last few weeks, and him being a part of the starting lineup has been huge for sure. And then I do think it's interesting with this Suns team. I think the big point of criticism, other than maybe sort of the big three fit that we've talked about in the rotations has been sort of just the center rotation in general. So I do think it's interesting that they're sort of maximizing Bull with Nick Richards. Just having your two best centers out there in your starting lineup, I think, can be really positive, even if they're not necessarily perfect and they might get a little bit picked on defensively. Just having that front court size is really huge, and then just sort of being able to maximize those minutes and maximize the size there, I think is something that we're seeing benefit the Suns recently for sure. Yeah, so in general, what do you sort of make around some of these rumors? I think that's sort of taken up a lot of the discourse lately around the Suns specifically. I guess we can start with Coach Bud because we have talked about the rotations a lot. What do you sort of make around some of the rumors with sort of him not necessarily connecting with the stars too well? We did see obviously the very famous quote about him telling Booker that he needs to be less vocal of the leader. And then, yeah, what do you see? What do you make of that and sort of make of his future with the team?
So I take some rumors with a grain of salt because yes, like a lot of the people that put out rumors, it's legitimate. These are very valid claims. I think at the same time though, you have to understand kind of what is being said, right? You have to understand Booker's a very vocal guy. He is on the court, he is coaching his guys up, and sometimes some people just don't like it. They squashed that rumor very quickly, actually. Bud addressed it, Booker addressed it. That seems to be good. It's weird because I don't know if I don't know if Bud has ever coached a guy like this before. Like, yes, he coached Giannis, and Giannis is a very vocal leader, but it's different, right? It's different because Giannis is an elite defensive player too, and he is a guy that might fit more into the system that he runs, maybe than Devin Booker. And what I mean by that is, yes, Bud wants people to shoot threes, but he understood how dominant Giannis was in the paint and how much of an athletic freak he is. So he really that's why he emphasized 5 out so much. So you can just have him, being a freight train to the basket. Where Booker's game is much more crafty. It's much more intricate. It is much more pick and roll heavy as opposed to just moving off the ball. And we've seen Booker can move off the ball really well, but him as a pick and roll ball handler I don't know if it's necessarily fit into Bud's system because yes, Bud does incorporate a lot of pick and rolls and pick and pops and things of that sort, but Book's a mid-range guy. KD's a mid-range guy. Beal's a mid-range guy. And you're asking them to shoot threes, and I get that. But basically going back to those rumors, I mean I wish it was the only one that was going around this season. There were, there's been some friction about, Bud's comments after the game with us as reporters and basically saying, well, like we have to be better. We have to be better. We have to be better. And it's like, cool, but how do you need to be better? That's the question. That's the $1 million question. How do you need to be better? It's not even that, yes, taking accountability is cool. We need to be better. Cool. That's fine. But how do you need to be better? And I think a lot of it goes back to the rotation questions that you were asking earlier. And it's have consistency, have defense, like the rookies that are playing in Ryan Dunn and Oso, like even the G League guys, like Colin Gillespie, sometimes Ty Washington, like those dudes, like they're Energizer bunnies. Like they, and it's funny because KD and Book and Brad, like they've talked about it the entire year, more so at the beginning of the year, that the young guys push them to work harder because they don't want to be outworked. It's a pride thing. They don't want to be outworked. And so, yeah, I mean, the rumors around Bud, I get it, but maybe, I mean, he's from an offensive perspective, I mean, the numbers back it up. He's always had good offenses, but it might have been a flash in the pan. Who knows? That's what it could have been, but it is also his first season. A lot of stuff has went down that I don't think he's ever had to deal with before as a head coach. And sometimes people just get overwhelmed. You get overworked. I still don't think with three, at least former, because I don't know if Beal is now due to statistical purposes, but you had 3 all NBA guys on your team, and you might not even make the play-in game. Like that's just it's unacceptable. And yes, Bud's a player's coach. I get it. He is for the players, but there is a certain point when you have to understand whose team it is. It is Booker's team. even KD and Brad, they both know that. Those two guys know that, like, hey, this is his team. And so I'm not saying that Booker's going to go out here dictating everything and, making coaching decisions. But granted, this is my first season covering the NBA. It'll be hopefully 4 years covering the WNBA. In my entire time of covering professional basketball, I've never heard a coach tell a player to tone it down vocally, ever. It's always been the opposite. It's always been, hey, I need you to speak up more. Like, use your voice. I have never heard, honestly, man, I have never heard in 22 years of being on God's green earth a player or a coach telling a player to tone it down vocally without probable cause. I get it if he's drawn technical fouls left and right, but he's not, right? Like, he's not. I don't even think he's in the top 10 for technical fouls, which is honestly kind of surprising, to be honest. Like, I love Booker, but he chirps a lot, and he might be the first guy to tell you that. But yeah, there's a weird dichotomy within the team, and to be honest, I don't even know if there is a dichotomy. I don't think anybody knows who is in charge, and ultimately, I think that's what a lot of the rumors with Budenholzer and Booker. I think that's why they came about. Do I think there's much to it? Not anymore. But you can sense some of the friction though. Like, even if you watch the games from a defensive perspective, from an offensive play calling, you know, there's there. I don't think there was the urgency that Booker was really looking for. But you know, I'll refrain too much from commenting because I don't know too much in terms of the specifics. But just from what I've seen on the court, there's definitely a disconnect there.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, it's just sort of a weird dynamic right now, and we don't have to get too much into his future, but I do think it is difficult, even as bad of the season as bad of a season as the Suns are having right now. It would be a little bit difficult to go on to your fourth coach in 4 years. I think that's just something that's always hard to do, no matter how bad the team is. Just having that consistency and stability is really important, but at the same time, just with how the season's been going, the sort of dynamics right now, and then the rotations as we discussed and how bad the defense has been. It's also hard to see him sort of coming back. So we'll see how that plays out. Obviously, the rest of the season will be super important in terms of determining that. And yeah, I do think it's an important point to think about as you brought up going from Giannis to Book and KD. It's got to be a much different style of play just based off who those players are. And it's tough because it doesn't seem like he's adjusted his overall like offensive approach too much. And then another thing I'd look at is just the defense. When he was the coach of the Bucks, they were giving up a lot of 3 pointers, and that was sort of their game plan, which is obviously a little bit difficult to do in the modern NBA. But then when you have a guy like Giannis protecting the rim and then Brook Lopez there as well, that's a lot easier to do, and it's a lot easier to sort of run that style of defense, the heavy drop coverage, when you have a team like that compared to a team like the Suns, just personnel wise. I think that's really difficult, and I think when you look at that, and we talked about sort of guys getting matchup hunted a lot, whether it's like a Tyus Jones, Bol, whoever it is. I think the Suns do have a lot of options there for the offense to sort of pick on. And then when you're not switching as much and when you're playing more so of that style of like drop coverage and giving up shots, it's just really easy to sort of exploit that. So I think that's another sort of important thing to note that I've sort of noticed while watching Suns games.
Yeah, man. I mean, what I do find interesting though is that, like, I'm looking at Bud's record here. Like, when he started in Atlanta, it wasn't the best. It was 38-44. However, when he started in Milwaukee, I mean, it was 60-22. Like, they had a great record. However, a lot of their team, and you know what? Maybe the more I think about it, you like in terms of you asking me earlier about, is it a personnel issue? It might be, because that Milwaukee team, yes, I am of the opinion Giannis is a generational player. Like, you don't see a guy that's that big being able to handle the ball like that, but just be a defensive menace the way that he is. However, Drew Holiday, all NBA level defender. Chris Middleton, I don't know if he was an all NBA defender, but definitely, like, premier two-way player. Brook Lopez, elite rim protector. Giannis, we know how he is defensively. He's won multiple Defensive Player of the Years, MVPs, all NBA, all defensive nominations, stuff of that sort. He has a lot of guys that were like two-way players. Is there anybody on the Suns in terms of their stars that are two-way players? I don't think so. Yes, Booker's improved as a defender tremendously since entering the league. He was not a good defender at all when he first came in the league. It was bad. It was kind of like a deer in headlights almost. Beal has gotten better. Beal has shown effort, but does effort count at this point in the season? I don't know. I don't think so. Not at this point in the season when you have the hardest remaining schedule in the league. Almost every story I write, I include that in there because it is such a point of emphasis. They have the most difficult remaining schedule in the league, and they haven't figured it out yet. But, those previous Bud teams had the right guys. Had the guys, yes, that could make threes, that could get out in transition, most importantly, that could play defense. But this Suns team, legitimately, maybe the best perimeter defender you have is a rookie. And he's a really good one. And I scratch my head. I'm not an NBA coach, so what I say probably doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. However, the eye test is big. I would genuinely say probably 50% of watching basketball is the eye test. Now, analytics and statistical nerds will debate me on that. I will die on the hill that says a big part of analyzing basketball is the eye test. Just because, for example, just because the Suns average, like their offensive rating, I think it's like 118 or something like that, does not make them a good offensive team, right? And just because, like, and it's funny with college, like I see it with college all the time, like, oh, just because you allow 60 points a game doesn't mean you're a great defensive team. Yeah, you know what? You might allow 50% shooting, even though they're only shooting the ball 30 times a game, right? But I bring up that point to say that yes, is defense an issue? Yes, we know Bud is not a defensive guy by any means. However, he had some of the best defenders, some of the best two-way guys on that team, and the only real two-way guy that they have is Ryan Dunn. Like, there's a running joke. I used to work for a company called PHNX Sports. Great company, great people over there, but they coined this term called the dungeon every time that Ryan Dunn would be matched up on a premier player. And he would clamp him and moving side to side great, laterally, vertically. Like, one of the most impressive things is that he doesn't have bad fouls. Yes, he fouls a bit. He's a rookie, right? He's gonna be a little bit overzealous sometimes. But like, there aren't, it's not a reach and foul. It's not a transition take foul. It's not these stupid, like, just ignorant fouls, right? Like, this is good. And I know I've talked about Ryan Dunn what feels like for a quarter of the time that we've been on here, but it's so important. It really is, because that's the ideal guy that you want in this system. He's not going to be a 40% three-point shooter. He shot no threes in college. I want people to understand that. Dude was abhorrent as a scorer in college, but he was an amazing defender. And yes, like, he went into the summer league. I think he only made like 1 3. He was like 1 of 14. Like, people were like, "Oh, it's bad." But like, the athleticism is too good to deny, right? His athleticism, just the defensive versatility. He's strong enough. Like, he's strong. Yes, he's like, this is crazy. Like, this is crazy to say. I've talked about this with some of my family members, some of my friends, and even people within the industry. Like, if Ryan Dunn truly develops his skill set, like, he could be what Mikal Bridges was for this team. He could be that glue guy. But it's crazy to say he could almost be better. He could, because he's bigger. He's more physical. Or he's just built more than Bridges. Like, they both have similar wingspans. I think Dunn's about an inch taller, and I'm sure he's probably about 20, 30 pounds heavier. So he can guard power forwards. He can guard 1 through 4. Even some smaller centers, I'm sure he could guard 1 through 5 if they really tried. But yeah, I won't lie. I mean, I don't know if you asked the question or whatnot, but the more I think about it, man, like you have a couple keys to what you're trying to be as a team. And yes, Ryan Dunn is not going, like, he's probably not gonna win you 5, 10 games. He's not. But you needed that consistency. I mean, he was, yeah, he was playing significant minutes in the beginning stretch of the season. Even when Beal went to the bench, they were better defensively. Granted, Beal was also better, but I mean, but dude, you have KD who's a good shot blocker. You had, you have Nick Richards who isn't an elite shot blocker, but like he's still good. Like he's a good physical presence. And you have a good amount of versatility with that 3, 4, 5 spot. It's too late to make a move now. I don't know how many games there are left, but there's not enough time. But I think it's the biggest what if of the entire season is if they just played Ryan Dunn more.
Yeah, definitely. I know we've spent a lot of time, but I think, like you've said, it's just so important to this team, and especially with their defensive struggles. And it is really interesting. Beginning of the year, he was getting a lot of minutes, and he was sort of in those early rookie of the year discussions. Probably wasn't going to end up winning it, but could have made an all rookie team for sure, even all rookie first team. And when you look at the Suns, they started off the season really strong. I want to say they started off the season 9-3 or something like that. I remember they were a top three seed at some point in November, and then they sort of just free fell. I think a lot of that does have to do with Ryan Dunn and just yeah, sort of the defense like we've been talking about all along, and the versatility there is just huge. And going back to when he was coming into the draft, he was really viewed as a generational defensive prospect, which is a little bit crazy to say, but definitely not wrong. And we've seen the impact already, which is just incredibly impressive for a rookie. It's very rare that rookies have this kind of a defensive impact. And yeah, it is very puzzling. So yeah, hopefully he can get back into the rotation soon. But I mean, who knows at this point? I mean, there's just so much evidence that he benefits this team, and it is really head scratching as we've discussed throughout the episode that he hasn't really been playing a lot. When we just think about roster construction overall, another big talking point with the Suns team is the KD trade rumors. I sort of mentioned it earlier that he almost got traded to the Warriors reportedly at the deadline, but it does sort of seem like the writing is on the wall for a KD trade. However, it does also seem like he really does enjoy playing in Phoenix and he does want to be there at the same time. However, as we discussed, they can't really move off Beal because of the no trade clause. So it does seem like the only way to upgrade the roster at this point is trading KD. Sort of, what do you make of that, and what would you be looking for in terms of a KD trade package?
So luckily, there's a man named Dwayne Rankin who works for the Arizona Republic, which is like our main newspaper here in Phoenix. And I have so much respect for Dwayne. I really, really do. Like he's honestly been a big mentor of mine, whether he's realized it or not. Just his professionalism, his attitude, everything of that sort. But he put out something yesterday, actually, that talked about some ideal trade packages for Durant as well as Booker. So for Durant here, like it's regaining 3 first round picks and a young player. It would have to be a part of a multi-team deal because they would have to get under the second tax apron. That's another part of the season that has been terrible. Their salary cap has been horrendous. Not even just because it's tied into those three guys, but they don't have draft picks. They squandered away all of them, and they traded away their most valuable asset, which was that 2031 first round pick to Utah for 3 firsts. And at first, I'm like, why did Utah make this move? Seems a little bit asinine, if I'm being honest, but it was because the Suns got the least favorable of those three draft picks. So let's say Cleveland's like the best in the East for the next however many years, they will get that draft pick. Like whatever team has the best record in the league, the Suns will get that draft pick. And granted, they've hit some home runs on some later picks. You have Ryan Dunn and Oso Ighodaro, who I'm really high on, to be honest. I think he can be a really, really good center in the league. Very, very smart. But yeah, like you need to get back some of those draft picks. Now, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to say the Phoenix Suns need to pull what the Oklahoma City Thunder did and just stockpile draft picks, but you would need to at least have some type of reinforcement in case, let's say, heaven forbid, but let's say like let's say Beal and KD are gone and then Booker sustains an injury, right? Like a season-ending injury. And you don't have a draft pick, what are you going to do? Right? So you need to regain some of that. And that report talked about You would get 3 firsts and a young player for KD, which I think is a good deal, to be honest, considering that they traded 4 of their first round picks to Brooklyn for them. But this all could have been avoided. I think that's the thing that bothers me the most about everything in this whole situation is that, if they wanted to if they wanted to trade Kevin Durant, they just had to tell him. Like, he's been in the game long enough. He knows it's a business. And yeah, it would suck to hear, but you would at least be honest and you would at least be upfront with him. And they weren't, they did tell him, they said, listen, they said, teams are going to be calling, we're going to answer calls about you. But that's it. They didn't say what else they were going to do. They didn't talk about, if there was an offer on the table. Like, KD was the one that shot down the offer to Golden State. He's like, I don't want to go there. But, how much I debate with people a lot about this because people say, well, they're athletes, they get paid a lot of money, it's a business. I get it, but there's a sense of respect, right? This is not like you're just trading a rising star. You're trading a Hall of Famer. And he's made it clear he has no problems in Phoenix. It's just he unfortunately, like I can't remember the metaphorical saying, but like, he is unfortunately like he's the scapegoat. He's the scapegoat of the Suns. And some fans have seen him that way. Maybe even the front office has seen him that way. It just sucks because this whole thing could have been avoided where the whole rumor situation could have been avoided if they just said straight up like, hey, this thing isn't working. We're going to ride out the rest of the season and we're going to have to trade. Like, yes, it's a tough conversation to have. And I'm not sitting here saying that that's an easy conversation to have. However, the front office needed to do their due diligence. I'm all for exploring offers. I'm all for seeing what you could get because the offer that they would have gotten was great. I think they would have brought back Jimmy Butler, which still wouldn't have made sense trading Kevin Durant for Jimmy Butler because that's not why they wanted to get Jimmy Butler. They wanted to get Jimmy Butler to get rid of Bradley Beal. But that didn't happen. But they would have gotten Butler. They would have gotten Jonathan Kuminga. And I think they would have gotten like 3 first-round picks for it. So, like, that's a good deal. But that's something where you just, you tell them. You tell your guys. You tell them behind closed doors. You don't, that way, to be honest, even as a member of the media, so that way you don't have this leaking out to the media. And then because there are definitely people that, and I won't lie, myself included, that have asked and that have thought, does this play a factor into how you play for the rest of the season? Like, does it limit motivation? Does it limit you wanting to make the playoffs because they kind of wronged you? And so I thought that the whole thing was done without much respect. Also, this is something that my colleagues and I actually talked about is that I think 2 days later, they had James Jones, the general manager of the Suns, speak to the media. You have that happen as soon as possible. Even if it's over a Zoom, you have that happen as soon as possible because you nip anything in the bud that would prevent this rumor from blowing up in their face like it has. So I think he's gone. I do. KD's been awesome. He's been super nice to me. He's one of the more insightful people about basketball. Like, dude just loves to play ball. He does. But I don't think there's any way that the Suns can salvage this situation. Unless for whatever reason they sneak into the play-in and they win an NBA title, which I say this objectively, I don't think is gonna happen. But yeah, I mean it's a very unfortunate ending, I would say. They definitely scapegoated KD for sure. And I think that I think the way that they went about it was distasteful, but it's going to leave a mark on free agents that are going to want to sign in Phoenix because they're going to say, if we suck, it's going to be my fault. And I didn't even do anything. So that could be the sour taste that it leaves in free agents' mouths, but also KD does hold the cards. That's the big thing. He could say, "No, I don't want to go here." Even if they have the best deal, and KD's a pro, he understands business, but KD could say, nah, I don't want to go here. You're gonna trade me here, whether you like it or not, or I'm just gonna not sign at all, and I'm going to be a free agent and you guys can deal with it. So, plenty of options on the table. But going back to the initial rumor, like 3 first round picks and a young player is probably the best deal. But them really screwing over KD might cost themselves, once free agency opens up, once free agency opens up in July.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you really hit on everything nicely. And going back to the trade deadline, I think it was really sort of odd. Obviously, they were linked to Jimmy Butler for months, and the rumor was it was very clear that Bradley Beal wasn't going to waive his no trade clause, and Miami wasn't really interested in Beal anyway, so you'd have to have a third team, and you'd have to have Beal waive his no trade clause, which wasn't going to happen. So it was pretty obvious there wasn't a clear path to get in Jimmy Butler unless you trade KD. And then it sort of just seemed like the Suns for whatever reason, didn't realize that until 2 days before the deadline, and they're like, "Hey, maybe we'll trade KD," and then that sort of went into sort of the scapegoating that you were talking about, and yeah, it definitely is very odd, and I do think it will sort of rub players the wrong way, and maybe they won't want to go to Phoenix as free agents, and yeah, I don't think there's a way to salvage this without trading KD, especially he only has 1 year left on his contract after that. And then going back to the trade packages, obviously, as you mentioned, 3 first round picks and a young player is sort of what they're looking for. And I think that would be an awesome return at this point, even though they did give up a whole lot to get him back in 2023. But at this point, that would definitely be the best return. And one team that's constantly been linked to KD is the Houston Rockets, especially because they do have three of the Suns' first round picks. So I think that would be a really good team to explore and sort of hopefully get your picks back there. Are you sort of focused on a Rockets deal in particular, or are there other teams you might be looking at to sort of land KD? And another thing I just want to point out, you brought up the second apron situation, which is obviously super vital, and it also explains a lot of sort of the struggles Phoenix is having financially because they can't make a whole lot of trades without they have to take back less salary. So that's another big thing. And the number is that they have to take back $11 million less in a potential KD trade to get under the second apron. And I think that's another reason why the Rockets are sort of favorites because they do have a lot of cap space and room to work there. So, yeah, are you sort of focused on a Rockets trade for KD, or do you think there could be other options?
Surprisingly, no. Yeah, Houston's good, right? There's, as you said, you can get your picks back. That's definitely a good thing. They have some really good young players you could probably get. However, I don't know why I've thought about this the last couple days or so. I'd really look at Washington. I would. I know their record is not the best by any means, but really since the All-Star break, man, they've been awesome. They really have. Like they've shown what they can be, and they're a young team. Yes, they're 13-51. That's not really good in the slightest. However, you have some young guys like they're fourth in pace in the league. They don't have a guy. They don't have a guy that is the number one guy. Yes, you have Jordan Poole, but like there's a lot of promise there. But there's also a lot of promise and a lot of players that the Suns could get back. For instance, you get Bilo Koulibaly. I doubt. I'm pretty sure I butchered his name, but like Bub Carrington's pretty good. Like they have a bunch of rookies and first, second, third year guys like Corey Kispert. That's a pretty good name, I would say. Heck, I mean they have Chris Middleton and Marcus Smart. They have some veterans that they traded for. It's weird. There's a lot of different routes they could go with this. I think Houston would probably be the best in terms of what you could get for them. Their defense is good. Their defense is really good. That is the Ime Udoka special. Yes, he has a good offense, but his teams are really, really good defensively. However, like, if you're the Suns, like I would look at probably trying to get back Jabari Smith, which would be tough, right? It's just more so who would you be able to take back that would put you underneath the second tax apron, but also someone that could kind of help you win now, but someone that's also young enough. Like I think Jabari Smith, ideal. Tari Eason, like that's either Tari Eason or Jay Sean Tate. Those two I think are really, really good. I think those guys are slept on, to be honest. Um, if you can get guys like that, I mean, because you have Amen Thompson, Dylan Brooks, Chengun, Jalen Green, Fred VanVleet. That's basically your starting five. If you can snag like Jabari Smith and because the Suns don't have a legitimate like power forward. Like I love KD, but like KD, he's interchangeable. Like he's a small forward, he's a power forward. Some nights it don't really matter. But like Houston, yes, you get your draft picks back. They have more players. You also have to look at what would Kevin Durant want. Where would Kevin Durant want to go? I think if you're on that team, if this is the nice part about Washington and Houston, he can be like the OG guy on both of those teams. More so with Houston because Jalen Green is emerging, Sengun is emerging. You know what you're getting with Van Vliet. You know what you're getting with, Amen Thompson is definitely developing. Like he's turning into one of the premier two-way wings in the league. He can go there and just play ball. He can go there and just be the closer that they need. He can go there and just be the scorer. He doesn't have to take on a huge he doesn't have to take on a substantial role with the team. He just got to score. He just has to play his game. But yes, I mean the more I say it out loud, Houston makes sense. I wouldn't rule out other options though. Like, and this will definitely have to be a 3-team trade. They can't just do it straight up because of tax apron purposes. But luckily, a lot of the Suns guys this season, Tyus Jones and Monte Morris, and there's a couple others as well, are on 1-year deals. So their deals are set to expire. Granted, they don't make too much money, but their deals expire, frees up some of the salary cap. If you can land a young player like that, cool. I think it is all dependent though upon how far Houston goes. If Houston makes it to like the second round and goes to 7 games, then I could see them being like, you know what, let's swing for the fences here. If I'm the Suns, I entertain any offer I can get, but if it's too good to pass up, you take it. If the Rockets offer you your 3 picks back, and they're but protections are a big thing too. You got to make sure that what protections are there, because I have seen some teams where they'll be, oh, well, we're giving you 3 first-round picks, but there's a top 15 protection on them. And if that team gets the 15th pick, well, sorry, you don't get that pick because of that protection. And so there's a lot of what they have to look at. Um, there's a lot of what Kevin Durant has to look at in terms of what he wants, because that's an important thing in all this too. Yeah, you can send him anywhere, but try to salvage whatever you can out of it, because whatever you salvage is going to help you in the long run with those draft picks and young players. Booker's also, he's young. He's either 27 or 28. He still has a good amount of game left in his career. He's a guy whose game will age gracefully because he's not a major slasher. He's crafty. He's a crafty guy. And if you can get some of those young players around him, like a Jabari Smith, if for whatever reason Washington becomes involved, I just look at Washington because of the amount of draft picks that they also got from the Bradley Beal trade. You can get some draft picks back from them as well, but I think that might be a conversation for another time. So Houston might be, and I'm glad you challenged me on this, because Houston might be the de facto option for them. But if I were the Suns, I wouldn't rule out any other possible landing destinations for him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you brought up an interesting point about the Wizards. That's certainly not a team I considered before, but sort of with KD being from Washington as well, that could factor in. I feel like the only way I would necessarily see that scenario is if they end up getting the number 1 pick, get Cooper Flag. Obviously, they're not going to trade Flag for Durant. However, that could sort of accelerate their timeline, and they could sort of pivot a little bit away from this sort of long rebuild and say, hey, let's get win now talent around Flag and make a big move. We've seen other teams sort of do this sort of a shorter rebuild. I mean, the Rockets to a lesser extent when they brought in Ime Udoka and then they signed Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks. That really accelerated their timeline a lot. So I think the Wizards could do that to more of an extreme extent, to your point. So I think that's definitely a possible sleeper team for Durant. And then another team I would look at is definitely the Memphis Grizzlies. They're loaded with draft capital and young talent, so I think that would be huge just to sort of make that move. I view them as a team that's really one piece away from true title contention. I don't think they can win the title with this, and they just have so many depth pieces that they eventually are going to have to make some sort of consolidation trade. So I view that as sort of a natural fit, and I think KD would really fit in well with that culture there, and I think that would be a perfect fit for all sides. But yeah, I'd be really focused on the Rockets if I'm the Suns, just because they do have so many of the Suns picks, and I think they can give them the best offer. And then to your point about Jabari Smith, I think he would be an awesome fit, sort of that versatile 4-5 guy, and I think he'd fit in really nicely. He can space the floor pretty well as well. And then yeah, I think the Rockets would be very open to moving off him. Just he did get injured at some point this season, and he sort of seems like maybe the odd guy out or the guy that they would be most likely to trade. I think they're going to try to keep a guy like Jalen Green or Alperen Şengün. So yeah, I think that's definitely possible. Obviously, Amen Thompson is another guy they really have to keep. He's really ascended into stardom this year. Yeah, another question I have, obviously we have talked about Booker a little bit, and it seems like the Suns are very hesitant to trade him, and rightfully so. He's just been that franchise guy. He became the all-time leading Sun scorer earlier this year, so it is hard to imagine them necessarily trading Booker. But do you think there's maybe a Godfather package from the Rockets here, or maybe they offer up 3, 4 first-round picks, including their own, and then maybe a guy like Jalen Green? Do you think that would even be something the Suns would consider, or do you think they're just so focused on keeping Booker and retooling around him, especially because even though you are getting 3 of your own first round picks, you're not going to get all your picks back. So it is sort of tough to go into a rebuild, even if you are getting some of your picks because you don't have all of them back.
I think it's a last resort for them to trade Booker. I think you do that if I don't know what the situation would have to be, but it would have to be bad in order for them to trade away Booker. And again, his age helps because and his game helps because I mean he's been to the finals. He dropped 2 40+ point games in the finals. Like he had one of the most efficient playoff stretches in 2023. Like people know he can go to that next level, right? The Suns organization knows that he's that guy, right? And they when they built the team around him, they went to the finals. So I'm sure that they're thinking the same thing can happen. However, going back to my buddy Mr. Dwayne Rankin, he talked about that some of his inside sources have also talked about. If I can find it here, the Suns could probably get 4 first round picks for Booker and a rising star, like in his third or fourth year. So to your point, like maybe you would trade for a Jalen Green, but if you're the Suns, I see no reason in doing that. And it's not a knock on Jalen Green. It's just like no, if you're gonna trade for a player, like you gotta yes, the Suns would probably lose that trade no matter what because you're getting rid of Devin Booker, but you would need somebody that is like a similar esque player. Jalen Green, like he's fun to watch. Personally, I think he's a bit too inefficient. I just do. I think he's a shot happy guard, and he's a dog. I will give him that. Like he's perfect for Houston, but just because he's perfect for Houston doesn't mean he would be perfect for the Suns and for their organization. And so I think you tease that trade. I think you tease a trade as an absolute like ultimatum. Like we're not going anywhere. We need to just hit the complete reset button. And maybe at that point, Matt Ishbia might learn to not trade away all of his draft picks because as we've seen, yes, you can trade away draft picks, cool, but you know, like I go back to Bradley Beal because I love Brad. I've talked to him before. He's a great guy, but I still don't know why you make the trade because you have somebody like that on the team, and his name is Devin Booker. Like they play the exact same way, pick and roll. They need the ball in their hands. Yes, they're good off the ball, but they excel more with the ball in their hands. Both go downhill really well. They're both elite mid-range shooters. They're good catch and shoot players. But I think with Booker, you try to retool around him. I think, in this KD trade, potentially, it's a hypothetical. If you get someone like a Jabari Smith back and maybe like a Jayshawn Tate or Tari Eason, we've seen what he does with versatile forward slash bigs that like 7 to 6'9" or 6'10" range. Guys that can shoot the three, can put the ball on the floor, but most importantly, that can defend. We've seen the results of that. And plus, I think those guys could also help someone like a Ryan Dunn. They could help him develop and mature, and they might even give him some more encouragement along the way. So I think it's a last resort if the Suns decide to trade Devin Booker, and if that's the case, then I think the Suns just nosedive into a rebuild, that they embrace like being awful for about 2 or 3 years and just trying to rebuild and trying to figure out who are we gonna draft, who are we gonna build our team around, and and they'll take it from there.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree. It's more so that last resort, or even I don't think you brought this up. If God forbid Booker ends up requesting a trade, then that's something they sort of have to do. And I again be looking at the Rockets there just because they do have the Suns' first round picks. But yeah, I think it's interesting how you brought up Ishbia and then going back to the initial Beal trade. I do think this sort of strategy might have worked a little bit better before the second apron era and going back a few years back to more so like 2016, 2018 range, where this idea of a big three was that was the big theme around the league. And now we sort of see it's more of a big five, or you have two superstars and then you have just excellent role players around them. And that's not really what the Suns did. They sort of went into that more so top heavy approach. I do think that's a big factor, just sort of how the league has shifted away from sort of those three stars. And I think that really does hurt the Suns in terms of roster construction. And then, sort of as we discussed, just the overlap in skill sets between Beal, Booker, and KD is another big factor there. And I do think Ishbia is a very interesting owner. Obviously, he's a newer owner, so maybe that sort of played into the aggressiveness, but I think you can never really predict what he's about to do, especially just what we've seen these first few years. I mean, he's sort of zagged. Well, the league is so focused on cap space and the second apron stuff. He said, we'll spend all the money, it doesn't matter. We're trying to build a contender. We'll trade all our picks, it doesn't matter. So I think he's sort of a guy he's a hard guy to get a read on. So I think it definitely opens up a ton of possibilities for this Suns off season. But yeah, before we wrap up, just overall, right now the Suns are 2.5 games back from the Mavericks in the play-in. On a scale from 1 to 10, how confident are you that they're able to catch the Mavericks and really secure that 10 seed and a spot in the play-in tournament, especially with the Mavericks injury situation?
Well, that's the big advantage they have, is the Mavericks injury situation. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like it. Yes, you trade away Luca. I don't know why that happened, to be honest with you. I'm still, despite all the reports I've read and what's true and what's untrue, I'm still in shock about it. But Anthony Davis plays one game, gets hurt. Kyrie tears his ACL. And even when they played the Suns on Sunday, like they had like two guys that had to go to the locker room, right? And it's, if you're the Suns, you should surpass them, right? They have the tiebreaker in the season, but again, going back to the fact that the Suns have the toughest remaining schedule in the league does not make their lives any easier. They play Milwaukee twice, they play Boston twice, they play New York again, they play Houston twice. I'm sure there's a couple others I'm missing, but Milwaukee, Boston, and New York alone, those are like three of the top five teams in the East. And the last time that New York and Phoenix played, New York put on an absolute offensive masterpiece. It was crazy. Granted, they hit like 60% of their shots. That definitely helps. But they put up almost like 150 points in 4 quarters. I was legit. I won't lie. I was kind of hoping they would get to 150. I was like, I would be really impressed if they did. But they need to. I don't think it's a matter of can you. It's that you have to. There's so many ramifications at stake. You know, this will be, if they don't make it, this will be probably the worst super team ever. At least with the Brooklyn Nets almost a decade ago, they got to the playoffs and they made the playoffs. And yes, they ran into LeBron James. And, it doesn't help when you run into one of the greatest, and in some people's eyes, the greatest basketball player ever. That doesn't help. But yes, those teams didn't work. They at least made the playoffs. Here, like, you're below 500. You have the offensive pieces because everybody said, and before I covered the team, I thought this a little bit too. I won't be afraid to admit it. Like, I thought that that was kind of Vogel's fault a little bit. Not exactly. Not exactly. Yes, there's a little bit of tension because of the assistant coach Kevin Young, because of his offensive scheme and how he wanted certain things to look, and there's a little bit of a friction between what guys were behind who. But yeah, if but going back to this year, like this year has just been an utter disappointment. And I hope that if they make it, I hope that the Suns send a big thank you basket to the NBA league office and to into the commissioner Adam Silver's desk for implementing the play-in tournament. Because if this was the case, if this wasn't the case, if there was no play-in tournament, this would probably be the worst season maybe of any NBA team ever in terms of the star talent, in terms of the problems, in terms of the frequent rumors from Beal getting traded to Coach Spoonholzer and Booker, to KD getting almost traded at the deadline, to Yusuf Nurkic's relationship with Mike Budenholzer. Like, there's been more this season that the Suns have endured than maybe ever. But it doesn't matter. They're pros. This is what comes with it. They tell us this all the time, is that this is part of the business. And you have to disregard those things. You have to disregard the fact that, yeah, we have the toughest remaining schedule in the league. Like they have to recognize that. And it's funny because Katie tells us, man, I don't look at the standings, but Booker's like, I do. I look at the standings. I look at where we are. I don't like the fact that they're not on the same page with that, because at this point in the season, that's what matters, right? And you have the toughest remaining schedule. And yes, their offense is great, but dude, their defense is nowhere to be found. It's gone AWOL. It's gone AWOL. And when you play elite defensive teams, or they're going to, like Boston, would I call Houston elite? Maybe. I mean, their numbers back it up. They're top 5 in terms of defensive rating and opponents' points per game. Like, they have a very physical style of defense, which is cool. That's on brand for Ime Udoka. But you know, Boston, Milwaukee, New York, even when they play again. And now Houston, like, you have teams that can switch, that can do all these things defensively. It doesn't make their lives any easier. And so to be honest with you, man, I don't know. I don't know if they can catch up with Dallas. You know, they would have to do a lot of winning. And, and we hear all the time, oh, like stuff has to change. It has to change now. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's putting Ryan Dunn back in the starting lineup for the remainder of the year. I don't know if it's, changing up or switching up your defensive scheme, maybe going from, instead of man to playing zone, or doing a little bit of both, or, hedging more on screens, or, trapping more often. Like, something has to be done. And a lot of us in the media we can't point our finger on one specific thing. It's everything. But if you're going to win, now's the time to do it. And if they get in, it will be an embarrassment to the franchise, to the league, that a team that was X amount of games below 500 squeaked in with this amount of star talent. The season could also be a failure if they don't make it. As what I said earlier, this could be the biggest almost disgrace of a team that there's ever been, in terms of the star talent, and the fact they couldn't even squeak into the playing game. The league even gave them a chance to do so. But at this point, it's looking very unlikely that they'll even get to a 9 or an 8 or even a 7 seed. So they got to win, but regardless of all the noise, it sounds so silly. They got to lock in. They got to understand how big the games are. They need some luck on their side. They need Dallas to lose some more, but you can't just rely on that. You have to win, and I'd say besides the first 10 games of the season, they haven't shown that they can do that on a consistent basis.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's like you said, it would just be one of the most disappointing teams of all time. Even if they do end up making the play-in, it's just incredibly disappointing given how much they've invested into this roster and just the overall talent that they have. But yeah, when you look at their schedule, it is truly daunting. I mean, I have it pulled up right now. They're only playing against 3 non-playoff teams for the remainder of the schedule. So the last 20 games or so is against pretty much all playoff teams, and even some of the non-playoff teams. The Spurs they've lost to this season. The Raptors they lost to this season. The Bulls they had a really close game with. So there's really no guarantee here. And it is just crazy to think about that it's really in the realm of possibility that they miss out on the play-in tournament entirely, especially with the injuries Dallas is dealing with. But it's certainly possible. But yeah, they really just, as you said, sort of need to lock in and finish the season out strong, even though it's been incredibly disappointing. And yeah, just get into that play-in tournament. Who knows, single elimination games, sort of anything can happen. I mean, who knows, maybe they do end up beating a Sacramento and then beat a Los Angeles Clippers team or something like that, and then you sneak in as that 8 seed and probably definitely lose to the Thunder in the first round, but at the same time, at least you made the playoffs at the very least. But yeah, just overall super crazy to think about. And yeah, this is certainly the most disappointing super team of all time, really. And yeah, it's just really shocking just with the overall talent they had. And yeah, definitely gonna see some crazy off-season moves, and definitely expecting a lot to change this off-season with this Suns team. So yeah, definitely one of the more interesting teams overall, just how crazy and disappointing this season has been. So yeah, I really appreciate you coming on the show and just sort of breaking everything down. You did a really great job and you really hit on everything. So yeah, appreciate it.
Appreciate you having me on, man. Yeah, it's been a whirlwind of a season, but we have about another month left until the true chaos ensues. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, like I said, appreciate you coming on the show, and we'll have to have you on at some point in the off season to talk about whatever happens with the Suns. So yeah, it was a great time, and I'm gonna wrap it up here. Appreciate it, Hayden.
Yes, sir. Thanks, man. Appreciate you.